for nearly 130 years. The Coca-Cola Corporation has delighted their customers, their shareholders, their employees. I mean, who doesn't love a Coke and a smile? It's a great thing until recently. I mean, just recently it was released that Coke had employee training where they were telling them to be less white. I mean, other than the fact that that's offensive and abjectly racist, it is the very definition of woke. And yet that seems to be where corporate America is headed. And that's frightening. And so we've invited back a special guest. You've seen him before, Justin Danoff. And Justin is the General Counsel at the National Center for Public Policy Research, and he's the director of the Free Enterprise Project. And he is perhaps the leading authority on not only the problem, but also the solution. So welcome, Justin, back to the Economic War Room.
Hey, Kevin, it's always nice to talk with you.
Always good to have the chance to have you here. You have really brought a lot of people knowledge and awareness of a very serious problem in corporate America. You've been studying it for years. You're way ahead of the curve. But could you describe exactly what it is that we're facing with this whole woke capital ESG movement?
Yeah, so what we're facing is what I call the collegeization of corporate America. That is the left's march through the institutions. We can talk about the left's march through mainstream media. We can talk about their march through Hollywood, through academia, and that's really where the corollary is exactly right. This looks like big business campus is becoming just that, a campus resembling American college campuses. That is a place of liberals, by liberals, and for liberals. And the way that this is happening is it's marching under the banner of something called ESG, or stakeholder capitalism. And really they shouldn't use the word capitalism after stakeholder because it no longer applies. But ESG, folks read it, they see it, their eyes gloss over, they don't know what it is.
It sounds so good though. I want clean water, so I'm pro-environment. I want social justice. I want people to be treated fairly, so I'm pro that. And governance, of course corporations should have good corporate governance. I mean, they all sound so good.
That's exactly right. Environment, social, and governance is what ESG stands for. It's not what it means, folks. ESG, my definition, and it's a working definition, but it's whatever a liberal interest group wants to achieve through corporate America on a given day. Let me repeat that. ESG is whatever a liberal interest group wants to achieve through corporate America on a given day. If you pull back the layers of the onion on ESG shareholder activism, on ESG investing, all it is social engineering using the vehicle of business to achieve outcomes that sometimes the left can't achieve politically and they can't achieve through the legal process. So they try and change the culture through business and business action.
Well, wait. Business is a Republican thing. The Chamber of Commerce is a Republican thing. What do you describe how that process happened, how they took over these corporations and what they're doing with it?
Sure. So, it's the big lie that you were told, from grade school. Right. I remember all the documentaries about how evil Walmart was, right? And they were, ruining everything, and that big business is in the pocket of Republicans and conservatives. It's the big lie because the opposite has been true for well over a decade now. If you look at let's just take a look at the boards of the Fortune 1 through 100. It's about 70 to 75% liberal leaning individuals that occupy seats on the boards of directors. That's crazy. And the other, 25, 30% are mostly moderates with a very few conservatives sprinkled therein. So it's an intentional takeover of business by the left, while they've been lying to you the whole time, saying that this is, big business is out to get you. One great example of how this was done, right? The gaslighting that's done by, the far left press and the far left politicians was Obamacare, right? Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama sold the country on Obamacare by saying big insurance companies and big pharma are evil. We're going to fix all the problems. Big pharma funded Obamacare.
Wow.
So did the big insurers wrote it. So that's how it happens. That's how the lie is told.
And my premiums, by
go.
the way, he said your you keep your doctor and your premiums will go down. Not everybody kept their doctor, and the premiums have gone sky high up.
That's exactly right. And it's the gaslighting of the American public. And again, it's good marketing. As you pointed out, who could be against the environment? Who could be against, good corporate governance? But when you talk about good corporate governance, what that means to the left is making sure that boards of directors represent, a certain percentage of minorities, a certain percentage of LGBTQ folks, the trans community. That's what good governance means to the left. Not that they should be stewards of their shareholders anymore. That's a bygone era as far as the left is concerned.
No, and that's exactly right. And ESG is a Wall Street takeover of our money to be invested for their causes. And that's frightening. And then I think about this. I think about a sports team. If you have to have every demographic type represented on a sports team, I can't see you winning the NBA championship, a Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, or anything for that matter, because if that's your goal, is to make the representation look a certain way, you're not going to get the best people and you're not going to get the greatest outcomes.
Well, that's right. And let's go back to, the other word for it, stakeholder, right? The Business Roundtable famously in August of 2019 said they were switching from shareholder primacy to a stakeholder model, that these companies were going to be responsible to all their stakeholders. Well, why did they do that? I think it's because responsibility to everyone means responsibility to no one, right? So these business titans, Larry Fink, of Blackrock, Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, if they're responsible to no one, then they're not responsible to their investors, and B, they can pick and choose the political causes that they want to get behind and use their corporate largesse to back those, favored policy positions. And by the way, they're all to the political left.
Yeah, and we're going to have to take a break here, but when we come back, we'll talk about the hypocrisy, how they're not even meeting their stated goals of supporting the environment or justice in any way, or really good corporate governance. They're actually going the opposite. And not only that, but it seems like this is a backdoor form of socialism where the elite take power and the rest of us live poorly. So let's take that break, and when we come back with Justin, we'll delve even deeper into what it means to have ESG or stakeholder capitalism. We're speaking with Justin Danoff, who's really the thought leader on standing up to woke capitalism, standing up for shareholder rights, standing up to make sure that the American corporations are more neutral and not pushing the leftist agenda. Where we left off, we were talking about ESG and stakeholder capitalism. That's happening right before our eyes. Tell us about what's going on, what you're seeing.
Yeah, so every year from the outside in perspective, right, from activist organizations, they file between 400 and 500 shareholder resolutions every single year. At the Free Enterprise Project, working maxed out, I can file probably about 20 a year. So that's the imbalance that corporate America is seeing from the outside. So the voices that they're hearing of their investors are their most radical left-wing organizations. And what they're pushing today is what you're going to see become mainstream in 3 or 4 years. And I'll give a few examples. So currently, they're pushing proposals demanding certain quotas for, quote, non-management employees on the board. Okay, what is that code for? That's code for union members. That's code for the SEIU literally having a voice in the boardroom. And this is going to become mainstream, folks. Take my word on it. You know how I know that? That's because 4 and 5 years ago, what the left was pushing was diversity for corporate boards. And diversity to the left doesn't mean viewpoint diversity or diversity of thought. It's diversity of what you look like, right? Your skin surface characteristics, is literally skin deep, the diversity that the left views. And so that's now mainstream. How do I know that? NASDAQ has gone to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and asked for permission to delist any company from its exchange that doesn't have a board seat for at least that one woman must be on the board and one seat must be set aside for, this is almost comical, an underrepresented minority or a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And Gary Gensler, who will be the new head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, my concern is they're going to rubber stamp that request. And what does that request mean? It means that any exchange in the United States can pretty much ask to delist any company for not getting sufficiently woke on pretty much any issue. So in a few years, I expect the next request will be what the liberal shareholder activists are asking for now, which is, union representation on the board. Because why wouldn't they continue to ask for crazy things as long as the crazy then becomes the mainstream? Well, and so that's where we are.
And speaking of crazy, I mean, the idea is that you have to have a woman or someone who identifies as a woman on the board. It's sufficient. So I imagine a number of boards are going to say, who's going to identify as a woman here so we stay listed? And the second thing is, when you put the union on the board, you're no longer representing the shareholders. What's that going to mean? It's going to mean that you're going to be pushing for much more money spent on the labor component. It means the union is going to determine what products are sold and what direction the company takes, what they report. I mean, all of these things that are corporate boards intended to look out for the shareholder will no longer be looking out for the shareholder. And if you own shares of that company, there's not going to be representation of your interests. It's going to be a representation of all sorts of liberal causes, especially paying the workers.
And if you want to know, Kevin, how much Wall Street has sold out to the communists in China, look no further than NASDAQ's request. Who's exempt from the minority/LGBTQ requirement? Foreign companies. Because there's no way that NASDAQ is going to have the Chinese companies listed on its exchange be forced to put, what are they going to put, a Uyghur Muslim on the board of a Chinese telecom company, for instance? I don't think so. So just the smacking hypocrisy here is, you can taste it. It's vile, but that's Wall Street these days. They've sold out to China, just like the Biden administration.
Well, let's stop and think about that. China is one of the worst polluters on the planet, so they're not good for the environment. China has social credit scores, not social justice, and they literally are selling the organs. They've been human organ harvesting and repressing minority religious populations and anyone who disagrees with the government. They've disappeared people. And they have no corporate governance because they can step in at any time. For example, Alipay was going to come out and they got crosswise with Xi. And as a result, Alipay was removed. They couldn't even come public. And that's the level of control the government. I have a friend who was on a Chinese board, and he said, sitting in the room at he was an American, it was an American company bought by a Chinese company. He said at every board meeting, there were 2 people sitting in the room, and they never said a word, but you knew exactly who they were and why they were there. They were there for the Chinese Communist Party, and they could override any decision that we made at any time.
That's right, and it just makes it all the more duplicitous what's going on in Wall Street these days. And again, you can look at Larry Fink, the CEO of Blackrock, in a similar way. In the United States, folks, he, being the head of the largest asset manager in the world, by the way, which Blackrock is, he votes in favor of liberal ESG shareholder resolutions because investing in Blackrock is passive. So he's using other people's money to put a cost of business on American corporations on these crazy environmental, social, and governance shareholder proposals that are submitted by, again, organizations on the left, and I've been studying them for years because they're technically my counterpart. These organizations that file shareholder resolutions at American companies, they have the same economic worldview as Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They don't care about the investments. Pardon the pun, but they use the proxy as a proxy for their culture war, right? So they're fighting a culture war through American businesses. And Larry Fink is using BlackRock's money to vote in favor of these resolutions because it comports with his worldview, while at the same time, he's heavily invested in China and turns a blind eye to anything that could laughably be considered ESG over there.
Yeah, the only, everything you said is true. The one exception I'll take, and I know you agree with me on this, it's not BlackRock's money. It really belongs to the individuals, the people. BlackRock is supposed to be a fiduciary and steward over this, and they blatantly came out and said, we're no longer going to look for the profit and return for our investors. We now are going to look for sustainability and all these other things. I mean, really, it's socialism creeping in through the back door. And when we have it, when it's instituted, we're going to face an animal farm situation where all animals are equal, just some animals like Larry Fink and others are more equal than others, and they'll be controlling everything. Now, we're going to have to take another break. When we come back, the good news is that you do have some solutions. You put up 20 resolutions or so a year, but you're waking up the American people when they realize it's their money. They may be ready to take it back. They may be ready to do something active with it. And we've got to get to that, because if we don't address this problem, America as we know it is finished. So let's take a break, and we'll be back with Justin Danoff. Welcome back. Well, we left off with Justin Danoff as we were talking about the takeover of the American corporation. And now we want to get into some of the things that we can do to take our companies back. I mean, these are the companies that provide the products, the goods and services that we use, the companies that we work for, the companies that we've invested in either through our pension or an index fund or something. They've got our money, and they're taking America really a really strange, bad direction, at least for most people. We've done surveys. John McLaughlin did a survey for us and found that the investor doesn't want ESG. They want liberty, security, and values, Western civilization values. So Justin, welcome back. Let's talk about what are some solutions. How do we take this back?
Sure. So first I want to address the knee-jerk reaction of conservatives, because I see it all over my social media feeds, and I think you probably do too. Whenever a company takes a woke action, like you talked about with Coca-Cola telling their own employees to be less white. By the way, you didn't mention in another slide, they also said don't appropriate other cultures. So I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to get less white without appropriating another culture. But that just shows the farce of all of this, right? The knee-jerk reaction is I'm done. I'm never going to have another Coke again. Nike signs Colin Kaepernick to like an 8-figure deal. He's a cop hater. He's a repugnant person. Oh, I'm done with Nike. Never going to buy him again. Well, guess what? I don't remember the Nike boycott going so well. There is no boycott of Coke right now. So the knee-jerk reaction to remove yourself from the situation and never use the product again, it's never worked. So I don't think it's going to work this next time. So, try and dispel yourself of that idea that you're going to be able to run the best boycott ever, because no conservative boycotts ever happened. That's the first notion. So what do we do instead? Instead, it's a single word. It's engage. It's engage. And if I go back to the boycott idea, the left doesn't boycott either. When they see a company doing something they don't like, they engage more. So again, they're the ones filing all the shareholder resolutions trying to move companies further to the left. They're using their investing dollars, again, to try and achieve a social, political, or policy result.
Well, can you define, just to interrupt you, define a shareholder resolution, what it is, what it looks like, how you do it, and what you can do about it?
Sure. So as an investor at publicly traded companies, every year, publicly traded companies have to hold an annual shareholder meeting. And at that meeting, there's votes for the board members, there's votes on proposals that the company puts forward, and then there's votes on proposals that the investors put forward. And this is where, even if you aren't, comfortable being the activist filing a resolution, that's okay. Why don't you vote on them though? Right? Apple held their shareholder meeting, February 23rd this year. I think Al Gore, who sits on that board, got about 99% of the vote. Were conservatives voting, or did they not show up? What we have at annual shareholder meetings is the equivalent of a red state election that goes blue every single year because the conservatives couldn't be bothered to show up and vote. So at the National Center, at the Free Enterprise Project, we have put together what we call the Investor Value Voter Guide. And this is a toolkit that's free. It's available, come online, nationalcenter.org, and it teaches people of faith and conservative investors how these proxies work and how you can vote your values. And it shows the good resolutions, the handful of good ones that we can put forward that help the culture. And it shows the really, really dangerous proposals put forward by the left that are meant only to corrupt culture and have nothing to do with the bottom line of investors. Many of these resolutions would do great harm to investors. And so, that's a tool that's free to use. And this year, for the very first time in April, we are going to be putting out a companion guide called Balancing the Boardroom. And this is all about, again, we talked about how there's no balance politically in the large corporations anymore. It's, these boardrooms lean dramatically to the political left. So we are pointing out the companies that are corrupting culture, but also the specific board members that are corrupting culture. And you can use your money and vote. Use your franchise. Voting isn't just once every 4 years for a presidential candidate and in the off years for Congress. Voting happens thousands of times a year at these company meetings, and conservatives need to start showing up. Our voices, when you remove your voice from the room, it becomes a whole lot easier for the companies to listen to the only voice that's left. And if that's a liberal group, that's who's there. And that's who's agitating companies.
And let me jump in on this. We all know that Washington has been co-opted by big business. And so your vote actually for the congressman and the president in some ways is less important because big business has captured Washington. So we have to capture big business. We have to take back that authority. And a lot of advisors just will sign up for these proxy voting services. And the proxy voting services, they'll tell you, you should vote on this and this and this. And they've been corrupted as well, haven't they?
They're actually, I get this question a lot, Kevin. Folks ask, what's the silver bullet solution to, the quickest way to solve some of these problems? The quickest way would be to end institutional shareholder services as an organization. For those who don't know, a lot of advisors don't actively vote on these proxy ballots. They use a service called a proxy advisory service. And there's two of them. Institutional Shareholder Services and Glass Lewis that control 97% of the market. 97% of the market. And they are so far woke, you wouldn't believe it, Kevin. They have never once supported a proposal of mine. Never once. And my proposals are meant to help corporations. I've never submitted a proposal that would harm a company's bottom line. The left's proposals, let's look at one just by way of a clear-cut example. Last year, they supported a proposal at Chevron that asked the company to align its policies with the Paris Climate Accord. A proposal that would mothball the company, end its existence. ISS supported that. And guess what? A lot of advisors that are voting on behalf of their clients and they're relying on ISS's advice, they're not paying attention that the advice has changed. It was a bait and switch. It used to be a good governance organization. Now it leans dramatically to the left on these ESG proposals, and you're doing a great disservice to your clients if you're relying on either ISS or Glass Lewis and you're not doing your own fiduciary investigations.
There's no question. And Justin, you've been a great leader on this, and I want to thank you for that. You were a pioneer. You went to the Labor Department when Secretary Scalia was there and helped them to realize that it was not in the interest of pensioners, people, labor, to have all of these woke positions that go contrary to getting the best returns. I mean, if you've got a pension fund, you want to get the best possible return, and you were a real leader in making that happen. I'm concerned about what the Biden administration is going to do to overturn that. They've already said that, or the SEC under Gensler or whatever. I'm concerned about that. But you've been a pioneer, and I want to thank you. And I want to invite you to come and lecture and teach at the National Security Investment Consultant Institute, and also as a part of the Economic War Room training. We're training financial advisors through Liberty University to consider their client needs, consider the best returns, and to help save America using this corporate methodology, the proxy voting and everything else. So thank you, Justin. You're a terrific guy, and we really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Kevin. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to put all this in our economic battle plan. You can get it at economicwarroom.com. And if you've got an advisor you want to nominate, go to economicwarroom.com/advisor. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.